With the 2023 draft finally finishing up, I thought what better time than now to take a look forward at the 2024 NFL Draft. It has superstar quarterback talent, great playmaking receivers to go along with elite edge rushers and lockdown corners. So without further ado, let's meet the class of 2024.
Now Williams faked it. Williams is going to throw to the end zone and it's caught. Touchdown. Williams.
Artless IOs.
May looking at Dave, quick shot. He does. Josh Downs. Touchdown.
Music licensing reimagined.
Forget the difference you can make in people's lives.
Henderson takes off. And the freshman gets the corner. It's a foot race. Down at the one. Down passes last year. This one's knocked up. Bowers tips it to himself, and he'll score. Touchdown, Georgia. The 12. Arm in trouble. This time he's sacked, and it's Jared Verse.
First down. Dart, here comes Dallas Turner. Oh!
Rising moves a throw, and it's going to be picked off. That is Kalen King.
Music licensing reimagined.
Right at the marker, but coming back for it is Crawford. As intercepted by Burke.
For the end zone, there was heavy pressure.
Alright, so as far as the quarterbacks are concerned, we have the top talent, who I think as of now is going to be the number one overall pick next year, Caleb Williams. He's very, very comparable to Patrick Mahomes. He's probably the most comparable quarterback to Patrick Mahomes since Patrick Mahomes. I think he's the best quarterback prospect we've seen since probably Trevor Lawrence. I think he's better than, like Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, those guys. And then I also think he's better than Bryce Young, CJ, Anthony Richardson of last draft class. I think he's definitely the best since Trevor Lawrence, if not better. You also have guys like Drake May. He's from North Carolina. Very similar to Caleb Williams, I'd say. He just does everything a little bit worse, but he's still a very, very, very solid quarterback. And then the tier kind of drops off as of now. You have guys like Bo Nix from Oregon. You got Michael Penix from Washington. You got Quinn Ewers from Texas. Quinn Ewers has got potential. He was a number one recruit from his class, but last year when he got his first start, he really he didn't impress at all. He had many overthrows. He seemed to not be on the same page with the wide receiver from this draft class as well, Xavier Worthy. He missed many times trying to connect with him. And then you got guys like Kyle McCord, who's, unproven, the starter from Ohio State. You got, who else do you have? You have Shador Sanders from Colorado now, Deion Sanders' son. You have Jaden Daniels from LSU, although I think he's more of an athlete than a quarterback. But, we'll see this season. Now, as far as the running backs go in this class, I wouldn't say they're quite as good as this past year's draft, but I do think there are a couple guys that could go pretty high in this year's draft. Guys like Travion Henderson, who some would say had a down year in 2022, but it later came out that he was dealing with a foot injury all last season that he had been playing through. And when Henderson is fully healthy, he's a big play waiting to happen. With his ability to burst through the holes and bounce runs to the outside, it's very Saquon Barkley-esque, if you ask me. And in his freshman year in 2021, he showcased just how dangerous he could be, and I expect him to make a bounce-back season in 2023. Then you have guys like Raheem Sanders out of Arkansas and Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin, who are kind of like your Derrick Henry mold, the type of guys who are physically imposing and would be more than happy to just run right through you. There's also guys like Blake Corum, who had a great season at Michigan, who could have came out in this past year's draft, but decided to run it back with the Wolverines for one more year. And then you got guys like Will Shipley from Clemson, Kamar Wheaton from SMU, LJ Johnson, who transferred to SMU, who previously played at Texas A&M, who have potential to make a rise in this year's draft, but are kind of like the unknown, I would say. Now, the class also has its fair share of receivers. There's guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., who's the son of Hall of Fame receiver Marvin Harrison. And out of all the guys that come out of Ohio State the past couple of years, like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, I probably have to say that Harris is the best prospect out of all of them, and I wouldn't particularly say it's close either. You know, you have Marvin Harrison's counterpart in Emeka Egbuka, who may be a little bit overshadowed by Harrison, but I don't think he should be. I mean, Egbuka quietly had just about as good of a season as Marvin Harrison, at least production-wise, I'd say. And then you got the speedster of the class and Xavier Worthy, who I mentioned earlier, out of Texas. You know, he has the ability to beat almost anyone deep. And you know, there's always at least one receiver in the class who goes pretty early just because he's a burner. And I'd probably say that's Xavier Worthy of this draft. You also got guys like Troy Franklin out of Oregon, who was considered the contested catch guy of the draft, you know, who also has the speed to beat you deep. You have the small electric receiver and Anais Smith, who should have came out this past year if it wasn't for the leg fracture that kept him out of all but 4 games in 2022. And then you have the big, massive target in Johnny Wilson, who was 6'7" and still somehow plays receiver for Florida State, even though I think he'll probably project more as a tight end in the NFL. And speaking of tight ends, there's a guy that goes by the name of Brock Bowers, and he is definitely the best tight end prospect to come out since Kyle Pitts. Bowers is one of the most favorite targets for Stetson Bennett. That's former 4th round pick Stetson Bennett. And you'll be able to see why I like Brock Bowers so much just from a few highlights. He's an extremely athletic tight end who's just going to be a mismatch nightmare for any linebacker in the NFL. Then you have guys like Jatavion Sanders, who's more of your possession tight end, who's also pretty athletic and can outrun some guys once he gets going to his top speed. Then there's Brevin Spann-Ford, who's your blocking tight end, who's absolutely massive. And if he can just improve in the receiving game a bit, he could be a very good tight end prospect. You have Jaheim Bell, who's kind of like a tight end running back hybrid for South Carolina. You just need to get the ball into his hands and magic can happen. Now onto the opposite end of the ball on defense. You have some very solid playmakers at each position, but for me right now, the best defender in the 2024 class is Jared Verse. Now Verse could have easily come out in 2023 and probably been a top 10 pick, but he decided to come back for one more year there at Florida State. He has one of the nastiest bull rushes in the class and also does a fantastic job at turning that power into speed. There's also Dallas Turner, who was Will Anderson's dancing mate in 2022 for Alabama. Turner is a former 5-star recruit who is going to be the main guy who Alabama trusts to get to the quarterback now that Anderson is gone. Then you have Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State, who are both solid pass rushers, Sawyer being more the athletic freak who is good at stopping the run, and Tuimoloau, who had one of the best games I've ever seen from an edge rusher in 2022 against Penn State, where he had 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Then you have guys like Braylon Trice, who put up a 10-sack season this past year, and Liatu Latu, who also had a 10.5-sack season in 2022. Moving now into the interior of the defensive line, you have guys like Michael Hall Jr., who showed glimpses of talent, but struggled to see playing time last season just because Ohio State had so many guys on that defensive line. But I expect him to have a pretty good season this year. You also have Mason Smith, who got injured early on last year, but was poised for a big season for LSU, so I'm excited to see what he can do this year. Then you have guys to watch like Jerzon Newton from Illinois, Brandon Dorless from Oregon, Tyleik Williams also from Ohio State, and many other guys. Moving on to the middle of the field with the linebackers, there looks to be a lot of talent this year, which was not the case for the class of 2023 this past season. Jeremiah Trotter from Clemson was probably the best linebacker from Clemson this past year, which also had Trent Simpson on it. He's a hard hitter who works through traffic easily and can also make plays when dropping back into coverage. You also have Tommy Eichenberg, who I love. Barrett Carter from Clemson as well is an explosive athlete with good instincts, but I'm worried if he can stack and shed blocks efficiently in the NFL. Then there's Scooby Williams, which, by the way, great name. Probably not the best name because there's a guy we'll get to soon who may have the best name I've ever heard in my life. But Scooby Williams is a really good coverage linebacker who's a fluid athlete, but maybe lacks the twitch necessary to be a good pass rusher. And now lastly, moving on to the defensive backs, there are a ton of good corners and safeties. There's Denzel Burke from Ohio State, who plays a bit bigger than he is, but he's not super small either. He's 6'1", 190, which isn't small by any means. He has fluid hits, but from what I can see, he has sloppy technique and is a little lackadaisical when getting out of his back pedal. Then there was a guy I was talking about earlier who has a great name, Kool-Aid McKinstry. He's a pretty athletic corner, which is why Alabama put him on punt return duty. He can high point the ball and just has pretty good ball skills in general. Then there's a couple of safeties in this class who are really good, like Javon Bullard from Georgia and Andrew Mabuka from Clemson. Then there's a safety duo down in Miami with James Williams and Cameron Kitchens, who I like a lot. You also have Cooper DeJean from Iowa and Kalen King from Penn State. There's just so many guys from this class in the secondary that are looking promising. So that's kind of the breakdown of the class and the big names to watch out for this upcoming season. Now there's always guys that come out of nowhere and end up being in the mix for the first round. These are just the guys I've gotten to watch a little bit of so far, but if you like the video, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It helps the channel out a lot, and as always, thanks for watching.